The void remembers screams long after they have faded. It remembers the shapes of broken prayers, the silhouettes of heroes burned into the dark like after-images of dying suns. In the silence between galaxies, faith still bleeds. Somewhere within that infinite ruin, a boy once known as Yuji Itadori awakens, not in the world he left, but within the endless dominion of the Emperor, where gods are born not from love, but from madness. He stands upon the ashen soil of a world that no longer remembers mercy. Above him, the skies boil with the laughter of daemons. Below him, the bones of fallen titans murmur psalms to forgotten kings. His heart beats like a relic dragged from another age, pure, foolish, unyielding. And in that purity, the warp stirs. Before we descend further into this forgotten faith, remember to join us so that our stories may never fade into silence. The first thing Yuji Itadori felt was the cold, not the mortal chill of air upon skin, but the hollow, metallic cold that seeps from dead suns and forgotten prayers. He opened his eyes to a sky the color of iron, where lightning danced like veins of burning scripture. Beneath him lay the ruins of a manufactorum, a cathedral of machines now collapsed into silence. Servitors twitched in the dust, their augmetic limbs still performing rituals to engines that no longer breathed. The wind was thick with the scent of promethium, rust, and the faint sweetness of rot. Through the shattered dome above, the imperial Aquila hung broken against the heavens, its wings scorched and half-buried beneath centuries of ash. Yuji stood, his body trembling, his heart beating in a rhythm that no longer felt human. He remembered nothing, not the name of the world, not the reason for his arrival, not even the face of the one who cursed him to live. Only fragments, blood, sorrow, a promise to save others no matter the cost. But here, in this metal graveyard, the idea of salvation felt like heresy. He moved through the ruins with cautious steps. Every shadow looked alive. Every whisper carried a voice older than memory. He passed a mural carved into the wall of a collapsed sanctum, an image of the Emperor, his face radiant yet unreachable, surrounded by kneeling figures whose eyes were hollow sockets. Beneath the mural, an inscription, half buried in soot, read, "Faith is the light that burns the weak." Yuji knelt and brushed the dust from the words. They cut deeper than any blade. A sound echoed behind him, a slow, rhythmic scraping. From the smoke emerged a figure draped in tattered robes, a rebreather humming softly beneath a rusted Vox grill. The man's eyes were pale with devotion, his flesh tattooed with catechisms. He carried a relic staff crowned with the remnants of a servo skull. "You breathe, then you are chosen." Yuji did not answer. His tongue felt heavy with foreign words.
The priest studied him, as though examining a corpse that refused to die. "You fell from the sky," he said. "A sign from the throne, perhaps, or a curse. Which are you, wanderer?" Yuji searched for an answer, but none came. "I don't know." The priest smiled, an expression closer to pity than warmth. "Then faith will decide for you." From the distance came the tolling of iron bells. The manufactorum stirred. Men and women cloaked in oil-stained vestments emerged from the shadows, carrying candles, censers, weapons forged from scavenged parts. They formed a circle around Yuji, chanting the Emperor's name in tones of fear and reverence. The priest raised his staff, its servo-skull flickering with dying light. "Behold," he declared, "the soul that fell from the void. May his light reveal what manner of spirit you are." Yuji felt something awaken inside him, a pressure, vast and terrible, like a storm held behind glass. The ground trembled, the candles guttered. In the silence that followed, the servitors froze mid-motion, as though the world itself was holding its breath. And then it happened. A burst of cursed energy erupted from him, unseen yet undeniable. The air rippled, the iron cracked, the murals wept molten tears. The priest fell to his knees, trembling. Around him, the congregation broke into cries of both awe and terror. "Witchcraft," someone whispered. "No," said another, "a miracle." Yuji staggered, gasping. The power that once bound his soul, Sukuna's tainted echo, still whispered beneath his flesh. He could feel it stirring, laughing in the dark corners of his mind. But this world was not his own. Here, power had a name, and that name was sin. The priest approached him again, his faith unbroken. "The Emperor has sent us to you," he said, his voice trembling with conviction. "A herald to test our devotion." Yuji wanted to protest. He wanted to tell them he was no god, no demon, just a boy trying to keep a promise. But his words drowned beneath the chorus of prayer. They carried him toward the cathedral's heart, through corridors lined with flickering lumen strips and the skeletal remains of old machinery. The deeper they went, the thicker the air became, as though the walls themselves were breathing. Statues of saints stared down upon him, their stone faces eroded, their hands outstretched in supplication or despair. When they reached the altar, the priest placed his hand on Yuji's shoulder. "All things that fall from the stars carry judgment. Pray, child of the void, that yours brings light." Yuji knelt, not because he believed, but because he could not bear to refuse the hope in their eyes. Outside, the storm grew louder. Bolts of lightning split the sky, illuminating the ruins of cities that stretched beyond sight, each one a grave, each one a prayer unanswered. And far above them, unseen, something vast stirred in the warp. A whisper, a laugh. A god's attention, briefly caught. The universe had taken notice of the boy who refused to die. The light flickered across his face, half divine, half damned. The bells tolled again, this time not from faith, but from fear. Outside the cathedral, the horizon trembled beneath the march of titanic engines. The vox grills of the manufactorum screeched with ancient orders, half corrupted by static, calling all living souls to the line. Through the stained glass of shattered saints, Yuji saw the silhouettes of armored figures moving across the ash plains, soldiers in battered flak coats, their lasguns clutched like crosses. The Astra Militarum had come, not as saviors, but as executioners of the unknown. The priest turned toward the sound, his expression shifting from awe to dread. "The guard," he breathed. "They will see blasphemy in what you are." Yuji rose to his feet, his voice unsteady but calm. "Then let me speak to them." The priest shook his head. "You do not understand this place, fallen one. Here, mercy is a heresy." But it was too late. The cathedral doors shuddered as the first volley struck, bolts of burning light tearing through the carved metal, shattering icons of the emperor into dust. The congregation screamed. The priest pressed his hands to his relic staff and began to chant, his words lost to the thunder of war. Yuji felt the air hum with violence. Instinct, born from a life of constant battle, awakened. He stepped forward, his body moving as though guided by memory.
When the doors burst inward, soldiers stormed through, helmets sealed, armor scorched, eyes deadened by decades of obedience. Their sergeant raised a hand. "Purge the heretic, no exceptions." Yuji didn't move until the first lasbolt seared past his cheek. Then time fractured. He crossed the space between breaths, his hands slicing through the air, redirecting energy he did not understand. The bolt shattered against an invisible barrier, scattering light like blood in the dark. Another soldier fired, another. The air filled with heat and fury, but none struck true. When the smoke cleared, Yuji stood unharmed. His eyes glowed faintly, not with malice, but with the impossible light of something unbroken.
The soldiers hesitated. In their hesitation, faith faltered. "Stop," the priest cried, stepping between them. "Can you not see? He is proof that the Emperor still speaks." The sergeant's helmet turned, the dull lenses of his visor reflecting the old man's trembling faith. "If he speaks," the soldier said flatly, "it is through flame and death." The gunfire resumed. Yuji moved to shield the priest, but the old man pushed him away. "Run," he whispered, smiling through the rising fire. "Even miracles must flee the blind." The next volley struck him squarely in the chest. Yuji caught him as he fell. The relic staff clattered across the floor, its servo skull flickering like a dying star. The priest's blood soaked through Yuji's hands, warm and human. "Do not let them take your light," the old man murmured. "Not even the Emperor owns it." Then his breath left him. Yuji looked up. The soldiers were reloading, methodical, unfeeling. Something deep within him cracked. The cursed energy that had once been his burden now surged like a tide. The cathedral shook, the air screamed, walls buckled, and glass exploded outward in a halo of red and violet light. When it ended, silence fell. Every soldier lay motionless, their bodies untouched, but their minds drowned in a wave of psychic despair. Only Yuji remained standing, trembling beneath the echo of his own power. He could feel the warp watching, circling him like a beast tasting blood. He staggered outside. The storm had turned crimson, clouds splitting like wounds across the heavens. Towers burned in the distance, the manufactorum's chimneys vomited smoke that twisted into shapes of sorrowful faces. He walked through the desolation in a haze, dragging the relic staff behind him. He could still hear the priest's final words carved into his mind like scripture. "Not even the Emperor owns your light." The phrase felt like blasphemy and truth. He reached a ridge overlooking the wasteland. From there, he saw the remnants of the world spread before him, broken hab-blocks, rivers of oil, statues of saints with their eyes gouged out. Above it all, the warp's faint shimmer danced upon the clouds, like the reflection of something vast pressing against reality. Yuji clenched his fists. He had faced curses, gods, and monsters, but never faith so deep it could devour the soul. He did not know if he belonged here, but he knew this much. Wherever he went, death followed. And somewhere in that endless dark, laughter answered him. Not the laugh of Sukuna, nor of man. Something older, hungrier. A voice without words, whispering across the warp. "You shine, little ember. You bleed light in our domain. Burn brighter. Burn for us." Yuji dropped to his knees, clutching his head. The sky convulsed above him, and from the heart of the storm, something descended. A shadow vast enough to eclipse cities, draped in lightning and ruin. It was not form, but presence, a thought made flesh. Its laughter became thunder. And Yuji understood. This world was not one to save. It was one to survive. He rose slowly,
gripping the relic staff, his breath steadying in the gale. "Then I'll survive," he said quietly, "until I find what this light is for." Above him, the shadow retreated into the void. The laughter faded, but the echo of it lingered, like a curse written in the marrow of creation. The manufactorum lay silent once more, but in the deep, the chaos gods had turned their gaze, and the game had begun. Ash fell like snow. The boy walked on. The boy was found 3 days later, wandering the outskirts of the ashlands. His flesh bore no wounds, yet he looked as though he had been torn apart and stitched together by grief alone. When the patrol of Astra Militarum stumbled upon him, their sergeant, an aging woman named Virila, took one look at his eyes and felt her faith falter. There was no fear in them, no pride either, only that quiet, unbearable calm of someone who had seen gods and found them wanting. They bound his wrists and dragged him towards their outpost, a fortress of rust and faith carved from the bones of a crashed void ship. Inside, the banners of the Imperium hung like funerary shrouds. Incense burned to mask the scent of decay. The wounded prayed to live another hour, and the dead were recycled into nutrient paste for the living. It was not cruelty, it was necessity. When they brought Yuji before the commissar, the chamber was lit only by a single lumen lamp. Behind the desk sat a man whose uniform had long ago turned gray with age and ashes. His eyes gleamed like steel behind a cracked monocle. "You're not one of mine, nor a refugee. What world claims you, boy?"
Yuji hesitated. "None. I don't belong here." The commissar exhaled slowly, smoke trailing from a cigar like the breath of a dying engine. "Then you belong to him." He gestured upward, not to the ceiling, but beyond, to the throne on Terra that none of them had ever seen. "All men do, sooner or later." He leaned forward, studying Yuji. "They say you burned a chapel and silenced a platoon. Daemon, psyker, or something worse." "I didn't mean to hurt them," Yuji said. His voice carried the weight of truth, but truth meant little in this age. The commissar rose. "Meaning is irrelevant. Only loyalty matters. You'll fight for the Emperor, or you'll die in his name." Yuji met his gaze. "And what if I fight for life instead?" The commissar paused, something almost like pity flickering in his eyes. "Then life will crucify you." He turned to Virela. "Send him to the front. If the Emperor wills it, the boy will live long enough to learn obedience." And so Yuji Itadori was conscripted into the endless engine of mankind's survival. They stripped him of his name, gave him a lasgun older than his memories, and marked his arm with the sigil of the Astra Militarum. His cellmates did not speak much. War had carved silence into their bones. Yet one night, as the void ship screamed across the upper atmosphere, a man with augmentic eyes leaned toward him and whispered, "We pray not for victory, stranger. We pray for a death that matters." Yuji said nothing. He had prayed before in another life. It had never worked. When the order came, the regiment was deployed to the front, an endless battlefield of blackened plains where metal towers sunk into mud and the sky bled warp light. Their enemy was not Xenos, nor traitor, but something nameless that moved within the fog, tearing men apart without sound or mercy. The first night, Yuji learned the sound of lasfire mingling with prayer. Soldiers screamed the Emperor's name, as if the syllables alone could hold back oblivion. Commissars shouted psalms over the roar of artillery, their faith weaponized to drown the fear. Yuji fought beside them, his movements guided by instinct rather than training. His cursed energy flared with each strike, invisible but undeniable. When the abominations came, shapes that flickered between matter and nightmare, he met them without hesitation. His fists cracked bone that was not bone. His will burned through shadows that defied definition. When dawn came, only a handful of soldiers remained, Virella among them. Her armor cracked, her face smeared with blood and disbelief. She looked at Yuji and saw no monster, no saint, only a boy who refused to die. "What are you?" Yuji looked toward the horizon, where the fog still burned faintly with unholy light. "I don't know," he said, "but if I stop fighting, I'll forget why I'm alive." Virella nodded. In that single gesture lay the shared madness of all humanity, faith not in gods, but in the refusal to surrender. That night, as they buried their dead beneath the mud, the priests of the regiment recited the litanies of remembrance. Their voices wove through the dark like threads of dying stars. Yuji listened, his hands still shaking from battle, and wondered if somewhere beyond the warp, someone heard them. And for the first time since awakening, he whispered a prayer, not to the Emperor, not to salvation, but to anyone who might remember his name. The wind answered only with silence. Yet within that silence, something stirred, a faint pulse, like a heartbeat in the void. The stars blinked, as if listening. The campaign dragged on for weeks, though time had no meaning in a place where the sun bled instead of shone. Every sunrise looked like a wound reopening across the sky, and every night smelled of smoke and burnt flesh. Yuji marched through it all, alongside the remnants of Virella's company, 40 men when they began, 12 by the time the moons turned black. Each day, the fog brought new horrors, mutated silhouettes clawing through trenches, the cries of men torn from existence mid-scream, Vox transmissions repeating the same prayer until their circuits fried. Yet Yuji endured, not out of belief, but necessity. His strength had become both shield and curse. When he fought, the soldiers called it divine intervention. When he faltered, they whispered that he carried the touch of the warp. On the 32nd day, they reached the Citadel of Dust, a fortress built upon the bones of a titan that had fallen in some forgotten war. Its walls were half melted, its spires crowned with rusted banners of the Aquila. The garrison that once held it was gone, devoured by the same silence that haunted the wastes. Inside, Virella found a chapel intact enough to hold mass. The men gathered, kneeling before an altar carved from broken armor. Yuji stood at the threshold, watching. The priest who led the sermon was blind in both eyes. His face burned beyond recognition. His voice, however, carried the clarity of conviction. "We fight not for victory, but for meaning. Every breath in his service is defiance against the void." The soldiers murmured prayers, their voices trembling not with faith, but exhaustion. Yuji could see it, the cracks in their belief, the hollow in their eyes where hope had died long ago. When the mass ended, the priest turned toward Yuji. Though blind, his ruined gaze seemed to pierce through the boy's soul. "You do not kneel," he said softly. "Do you not believe?" Yuji hesitated. "I've seen too many die praying. I don't know what believing means anymore." The priest smiled, a motion both tragic and kind. "Then you are closer to faith than most." He pressed something into Yuji's hand, a fragment of glass etched with the imperial aquila, blackened by fire. "Faith is not certainty," he said. "It is choosing to walk through the dark, even when the light never answers." Yuji looked down at the shard. It reflected his face distorted, as though already half consumed by shadow. He pocketed it and said nothing. That night, the warp came for them. It began with whispers through the vox, voices speaking in a dozen tongues, all carrying the same phrase. He watches, he listens, he hungers. The air grew thick with static. Then the walls trembled. The citadel's outer gates crumbled under unseen weight. From the mist poured things that wore the shapes of men, but moved like nightmares. Daemons of chaos, their flesh liquid, their laughter metallic. The soldiers fought like saints damned from birth. Lasfire tore through the dark. Chainswords screamed hymns of blood. Yuji threw himself into the fray, fists igniting with cursed energy that glowed like dying stars. Each strike shattered bone and shadow alike, but with every blow he felt something respond, a presence within the warp pressing closer, curious, hungry. "You fight as though you remember love," the voice whispered in his mind. "Tell me, little spark, what will you give when love fails you again?" He screamed, not from fear but from defiance, hurling himself through the tide until the demons dissolved into mist. The field went silent once more. When it was done, only 6 soldiers remained. The priest lay dead among them, his body still kneeling, his lips frozen in prayer. Virella sat beside him, staring at her blood-soaked hands. "We keep fighting," she said hoarsely. "That's what they'd want." Yuji nodded, but his gaze drifted to the horizon. The storm above had changed. Its color deepened to violet, swirling with the impossible geometry of the warp. In the distance, he saw something vast move beneath the clouds, its outline like a throne made of bone and flame. That night, as they rebuilt their defenses, he sat alone outside the walls, staring into the dark. His thoughts wandered to the world he'd lost, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of laughter, the taste of ordinary days. Here, such things were heresy. Here, only faith endured, and even that faith bled. He drew the shard of the aquila from his pocket, holding it up to the faint starlight. It caught the reflection of his face and split it in two, half shadow, half flame. "I don't belong here," he whispered. "But maybe no one does." The wind answered with the hum of the warp. Somewhere within that endless murmur, the same mocking voice returned. "You belong where despair remembers your name." He closed his eyes, and though he didn't realize it, the shard in his hand pulsed once, faintly, as if something within had awakened. The Emperor's light was far away, but something else, something older, had begun to notice him. In the silence of the dead fortress, the boy breathed, and the warp breathed back. The warp storms did not pass, they lingered, coiling above the citadel of dust like a living crown of damnation. Every night, the skies burned with colors that did not belong to reality. Violet, crimson, and gold bleeding into one another, each hue whispering promises. The survivors slept in shifts, if at all.
Their rations dwindled, their faith wore thin, and their prayers turned desperate. Yet through it all, Yuji remained strangely calm. The others could not decide whether to fear or follow him. Some whispered he was an angel disguised in mortal flesh. Others murmured that he carried a daemon's heart. Varela, however, watched him without superstition. She had seen too many heroes die to believe in salvation. What she saw instead was exhaustion, the kind of quiet strength that only those who've suffered for something greater could bear. One morning, she found him sitting before the shattered altar, the relic staff of the dead priest resting across his knees. His eyes were fixed on the broken Aquila above, its wings jagged, one half missing entirely. "Do you still pray?" she asked, her voice low, the air thick with the scent of burnt oil. Yuji shook his head. "Not in the way they do. I just talk. Maybe someone listens. Maybe no one does." Varela sat beside him, her lasgun resting against her shoulder. "That's still prayer," she said, "even if it's only to yourself." He looked at her then, his expression unreadable. "Then what do you pray for?"
She smiled without humor. "For an end that means something." A silence settled between them, filled only by the distant hum of broken generators and the wind that carried voices from the past. It was a fragile peace, the kind that never lasted long in the Imperium. By nightfall, the warp storm flared anew. The walls groaned, the Vox screamed with phantom signals, and the sky split open. Something was coming. The first sign was light, a lance of gold searing through the clouds, pure and impossible. For a moment the soldiers dared to believe it was deliverance. But then the light darkened, twisting into shadow, and from the rift descended shapes made of both flesh and machine. Demons fused with the remnants of servitors, their limbs wrapped in cables that pulsed like veins. The chaos gods were no longer content to whisper. They had sent their messengers. Varela shouted orders, her voice drowned by the rising wind. The soldiers formed ranks, laze fire cutting through the night like desperate hymns. Yuji stood at the forefront, the relic staff clutched in his hands, his cursed energy flaring around him in tendrils of gold and black. When the creatures struck, time fractured again. Yuji moved like memory, his strikes echoing with violence too divine to belong to man. Each blow shattered bone and faith alike. The staff glowed brighter with every impact, until the Aquila engraved upon its head burned with white flame. The demons screamed, not from pain, but for recognition. "You do not belong here," they hissed, their voices merging into one. "You are a fracture, an error in the Emperor's design." Yuji ignored them. For every monster that fell, two more rose. His body burned, every nerve aflame, but still he fought, because he could not stop, because stopping meant remembering what he'd lost. Varela saw him falter, saw the cursed energy ripple violently around him. "Yuji!" she shouted. "Fall back!" But he couldn't. The world had narrowed to motion and breath, to light and shadow. And then, in the heart of the storm, the largest of the demons emerged. A towering figure draped in crimson armor, its skull-faced helm marked with runes that bled. Its voice was thunder. "Blood feeds the gods, little soul. Yours will sing the loudest."
He met the creature's charge head-on. The impact split the earth. The staff cracked in his grip, light pouring from the fracture like divine blood. For an instant, the storm froze. The warp itself seemed to recoil. And in that impossible stillness, Yuji's energy flared outward, a shockwave that turned everything to silence and ash. When it ended, the citadel of dust was no more. The walls had melted. The demons were gone, burned out of existence. Only the blackened outline of the fortress remained, a scar carved into the land. Yuji lay at its center, unconscious, the relic staff broken beside him. Around him, the surviving soldiers knelt, not out of reverence, but fear. Virella approached slowly. She touched his shoulder, half expecting his flesh to dissolve into smoke, but he lived. His pulse was faint but steady. She looked up at the ruined sky and whispered, "Emperor, forgive us. We've seen a miracle." But deep down she knew what she had witnessed was no miracle. It was a question so vast that no god could ever answer it. As dawn broke over the wasteland, the light revealed what the night had hidden. The shard of the Aquila Yuji carried was gone. In its place, burned into his chest, was a faint mark. 2 wings of light, incomplete, waiting to be whole. The Emperor's servants would call it heresy. The warp would call it prophecy. But Yuji Itadori would call it a burden. And far away, in the quiet places between reality and madness, something vast stirred and smiled. He awoke to the sound of engines, distant, ancient, and mournful. Their rhythm reminded him of a heartbeat, slow and inevitable, echoing through the steel skeleton of the world. When Yuji opened his eyes, he saw no sky, only darkness laced with faint blue light. He was aboard a ship. The walls curved inward like the ribs of some colossal beast. Pipes hissed steam into the air, and servo lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows that writhed like living things. Chains hung from the ceiling, swaying in rhythm with the ship's pulse. Virella sat nearby, her uniform in tatters, her face drawn and pale. She said, "You've been asleep for 3 days. We found you breathing under the rubble, thought you were gone." Yuji tried to sit up, but his muscles trembled. "Where are we?" "The Saint of Iron, a transport void ship. It answered our distress signal. Or maybe it didn't." She shifted her gaze to the wall, where strange runes pulsed faintly beneath the plating, as if the metal itself was dreaming. Half the crew's missing, the rest speak of whispers in the vents.
Yuji frowned. "The warp?" She nodded. "We're traveling through it. The navigators are blind, the machine spirit's erratic. It feels like we're moving in circles, but the instruments say otherwise." He closed his eyes, trying to steady the storm inside him. The mark on his chest pulsed softly, glowing beneath his skin like a dying star. Every time it beat, he could feel something beyond the hull calling to him, familiar, immense, and wrong. When he spoke, his voice was distant. "It's watching." Virella turned sharply. "What is?" "I don't know, but it knows me." She wanted to ask more, but the lights flickered. A low groan rolled through the ship, like metal weeping. Over the vox, static screamed, followed by a voice calm, mechanical, reverent. "To all decks, the Emperor watches. The flesh is weak, the soul must obey." The words repeated, distorted, until the signal dissolved into whispers. Phrases layered atop one another, thousands of voices speaking as one. Yuji stood, gripping the edge of the bunk. "That's not just a transmission." Virella's eyes narrowed. "No, it's prayer." The ship's corridors were narrow, lined with hanging cables and the remnants of incense smoke. Servo skulls drifted silently overhead, their lenses cracked, their holy seals replaced by symbols that twisted when looked at too long. As they moved deeper into the vessel, the air grew heavier, the chanting grew louder. Voices of crewmen kneeling in rows, their faces hidden behind rebreathers, their hands clasped around candles that burned with black flame. They were worshipping something sealed behind the bulkhead, a great sealed door inscribed with the Imperial Aquila, or what was left of it. The left wing had been replaced by a symbol Yuji had never seen before, an intricate spiral of eyes and teeth carved into the metal,
pulsing faintly like an open wound. "Who did this?" Yuji whispered.
One of the kneeling crew turned, his voice rasping through his mask. "He speaks to us now, through the void. The true emperor, the one who bleeds." Virella raised her weapon. "Blasphemy! Stand down in the name of holy Terra!" But the man only smiled beneath his mask. "Terra is ash. Faith has found new flesh." Before she could fire, the chanting surged, the bulkhead trembled, the symbol on the door flared, spilling light that was not light. The crew screamed in ecstasy and terror as the air warped around them. Yuji grabbed Virella and pulled her back as the door exploded outward, not in shards, but in fragments of sound. A wave of psychic resonance tore through the chamber, bending the metal, warping the air. And from within stepped a figure, neither man nor daemon, but both. Its armor was sculpted in the image of a saint, but its face was a shifting mask of sorrow and rage. Chains of scripture bound its limbs, glowing with words that changed as they were read. When it spoke, the walls shook. "I am the voice that bled between worlds. You are the fracture. You carry his silence." Yuji felt his knees buckle under the weight of that presence. He could feel the warp roaring within him, echoing against the thing's existence like two mirrors staring into each other. He looked up through the flickering light, his breath trembling. "Why me?" The figure tilted its head. "Because you asked to save everyone, and the warp does not forget promises." Yuji's blood ran cold. It knew him, not just his name, but his truth, the part of him that had once begged to save a dying friend, to bear a curse in their place. "You're not the Emperor," he whispered. "No," the figure replied, voice breaking into laughter that sounded like screams. "I am what he left behind when he turned his face from mercy." The walls around them pulsed like a living heart. Virella raised her gun again, but the weapon melted in her hands, the metal dripping like wax. Yuji stepped forward. "Then, if you're his shadow, tell me, what does he want?" The figure leaned closer. "To remember or to forget, it matters little. You, little fracture, will remind him what suffering feels like." Then it raised its hand, and reality broke open.
The corridor vanished, the ship dissolved. Yuji fell through the void, surrounded by whispers and fire. He saw faces, human, divine, monstrous, all gazing at him, all reaching out as if to claim a piece of his soul. He screamed without sound, and in that scream the universe whispered back, "Welcome home." The stars dimmed, and the warp unfolded like a mouth ready to speak his name. He fell through eternity. The sensation had no direction, no gravity, no sky, only motion through endless light and shadow. Around him, fragments of the Saint of Iron floated like dying thoughts, twisted steel, bodies suspended in dreamless sleep, fragments of hymns echoing through the void. The warp was not a place. It was a wound that thought. He landed on something that felt like memory. The ground beneath him shimmered, forming and dissolving with every breath. It looked like soil, but pulsed like flesh. Each step released a faint hum, like a choir trapped beneath the surface. The air smelled of copper and rain. There was no horizon, only the curve of infinity shimmering with spectral storms.
Yuji stood slowly. His chest still glowed faintly, the mark burning beneath his torn uniform. He was alone, or so he thought. In the distance, shapes began to rise, first shadows, then forms. They took the likeness of men, but imperfectly, as though sculpted by someone who had forgotten what humanity truly looked like. Faces melted into each other, eyes blinked in wrong places. Their movements were graceful and broken all at once. And in the midst of them, a throne. It was not golden like the myths of Terra, but carved from obsidian bones and chains of light. Upon it sat a figure veiled in tattered banners of war, their armor glimmering with sigils that bled and healed in endless rhythm. Where a face should be, there was only a void, a silhouette crowned by whispers. When it spoke, Yuji felt the sound within his bones rather than his ears. "Welcome to the mouth of your question, mortal. Here, gods listen." He took a step forward. "Who are you?"
The shadows around the throne shifted, merging into the shape of wings. We are hunger. We are the truth behind prayer. The warp remembers all things men fear to understand. Yuji clenched his fists. If you're the gods they speak of, then why destroy what they worship? A pause. Then laughter, soft, beautiful, and terrible. Because faith is a wound, and we are its blood. The throne leaned forward. Tell me, Yuji Itadori of the dead world, do you still believe in saving others? He flinched. How do you know my name? Names are echoes. You carried yours through death, through curses, through the sea of souls. It calls to us still. He looked down, his breath unsteady. I don't know if I believe anymore. Every world I've touched burns. The figure rose from the throne, its form dissolving into radiant ash. Then you are the perfect offering. The ground trembled, the shadows scattered. From every direction light surged, 4 directions, 4 colors, 4 voices that shook the fabric of reality. The first voice thundered like drums made from blood. Corn claims the fire in your heart. The second purred with sweetness laced with venom. Slanesh adores the ache in your soul. The third laughed like turning pages in 1,000 forbidden books. Zinch covets your doubt. And the fourth croaked, soft and patient, Nurgle welcomes your sorrow. Yuji fell to his knees, clutching his head. The voices tore through him, stripping away the walls of thought until only feeling remained. Rage, desire, fear, despair, each one surged through him, like poison and promise. They surrounded him now, 4 shapes of impossible grandeur. Each was a fragment of divinity. Each was an answer to pain. Khorne appeared first, wreathed in fire, his armor made from the skulls of 1,000,000 wars. His eyes burned with judgment. You fight to protect, yet your hands are red with blood. There is no purity in mercy. Serve me, and I will make your rage holy. Yuji's vision blurred with heat. He remembered every friend he couldn't save, every death he had caused in the name of kindness. Before he could speak, the air turned fragrant.
Slanesh emerged, silver and silk, a beauty too perfect to be born. "You suffer because you deny your hunger," they whispered, voice neither male nor female, but the promise of both. "Let your heart feel again. Let your joy be divine." He felt his body tremble, torn between longing and shame. Then Tzeentch's laughter rippled through the void. A figure cloaked in shifting feathers hovered above him, 1,000 eyes blinking in unison. "You fight for meaning when none exists. Accept my gift, and I shall show you the pattern that binds gods and ghosts alike." Finally, Nurgle stepped forward, a massive form of decay that somehow radiated warmth. Flies buzzed around him like stars. "You cling to pain as though it makes you righteous. Let it go. Let rot be peace." Yuji's breath broke. "You all speak like you know me." "We do," they said in unison, "because you are human, and humanity is all that we are." He tried to rise, but his strength faltered. The mark on his chest flared brighter, pulsing like a second heart. It hurt, like something inside him was trying to answer. Then the laughter stopped. The 4 gods stepped back as a new voice filled the air, quiet, almost human, yet it silenced everything. "He is not yours." The void bent. From the darkness emerged a figure wreathed in golden light. Not solid, not fully real. A man upon a broken throne, his eyes like dying suns. The Emperor, or the idea of him. The gods hissed, their forms unraveling. Yuji looked up, his vision blurred with tears. "You—" The golden figure's face was unreadable. "You do not belong here, child of another dying world. Yet you carry a question I once asked myself." "What question?" The light flickered. "Can salvation exist without cruelty?"
The air shattered. The gods screamed, and Yuji was flung backward into the dark, his body burning with the light of 2 realities colliding. As he fell, he heard the voice again, soft, fading, almost kind. "Find me where faith ends." He plunged through the abyss, the stars around him dying one by one. When he landed, the world was silent, and he was no longer certain which side of divinity he had touched. He awoke screaming, his voice swallowed by the void. Cold air filled his lungs like glass dust. The floor beneath him was solid again, metal, rusted, trembling faintly underfoot. For a moment, Yuji thought he had returned to the Saint of Iron. But the silence was too deep, too perfect. No engines, no voices, only the faint hum of something alive and watching. He rose slowly. The corridor stretched into infinity, its walls lined with statues, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Each one was a soldier carved from stone, their weapons lowered, their heads bowed. Every face was different, every expression etched with grief. As Yuji passed them, he realized the truth. They weren't statues. They were bodies, petrified, preserved mid-prayer. A faint light burned at the corridor's end. He followed it, each step echoing like a heartbeat. His body ached with memory. The mark on his chest throbbed in time with the pulse of the warp. The voices of the Chaos Gods had gone silent, but their absence was worse than their presence. It felt like the world was holding its breath. When he reached the chamber beyond, he stopped. It was vast, shaped like a cathedral inverted upon itself. The floor was a mirror of black glass, reflecting a ceiling covered in frescoes of saints melting into stars. In the center stood a single throne, smaller than the one he'd seen in the warp, yet eerily familiar.
It was carved from bone and brass, wires trailing from it like veins, feeding into machines that pulsed with a heartbeat of their own. And upon it sat a figure. At first, Yuji thought it was a corpse. The man's armor was ancient, black and gold, trimmed with sigils of an empire forgotten. His skin was pale as marble, his hair the color of ash. Tubes pierced his spine, connecting him to the machine. His eyes were closed, but his lips moved faintly, whispering a prayer too quiet to hear.
Yuji stepped closer. The mark on his chest flared. The man opened his eyes. They were not human. They were stars, cold, dying, endless. "You came through," the man said, his voice soft, yet heavy enough to bend the air. "Few do." Yuji froze. "Who are you?" The man smiled faintly. "Once they called me saint, then heretic, then nothing at all." His gaze drifted past Yuji as though looking into another time. "I was the first to hear his silence, and I could not bear it." The machines hissed softly behind him. Yuji felt the hair rise on his arms. "You mean the Emperor?" The saint nodded. "He has not spoken in 10,000 years, but his silence is not death. It is despair made divine." Yuji approached cautiously. "Why am I here?" The man looked down at him, eyes shimmering with strange compassion. "Because you asked to save a world that was not yours. You carried that promise into the warp, and now it has answered." "I didn't ask for this," Yuji said, his voice cracked. "I just wanted to protect people." "That is always how it begins." The saint leaned forward, the wires pulling taut. "Do you know what happens when a mortal soul crosses the sea of souls with intent that pure? It becomes dangerous." Yuji's pulse quickened. "Dangerous how?" "Because purity cannot exist in the warp without being devoured." The saint extended a trembling hand. His fingers were half metal, half flesh. "You've seen them, haven't you? The four? They offer what you fear most: purpose." Yuji hesitated, memories flickering. Korn's rage, Slanesh's hunger, Tzeentch's laughter, Nurgle's warmth. "They said they were human." The saint expression darkened. "They are. They are what remains when humanity stops pretending it can be good." The words struck him like a blade. Yuji clenched his fists. "Then what am I supposed to be?" The saint smiled sadly. "The question itself is your curse. You do not belong to the warp, yet you cannot return to the mortal realm untouched. You are between worlds, faith without a god." He stood then, slow and unsteady. The throne's cables tore from his back, leaking golden light instead of blood. I tried to make peace with the silence. I thought if I believed hard enough, he would answer. But there is no answer, only echo. The light grew brighter, swallowing his features, and now the echo takes form through you. Yuji stumbled back. "No, I'm not!" The saint's voice deepened, layered with something vast. "You are the proof that mercy still dares to exist, and the warp hates that." The chamber shook. Cracks split the floor. The frescoes above bled light that dripped like molten glass. The saint looked up. his voice breaking into a whisper. "They found you again." The walls began to dissolve. The statues in the corridor screamed as life returned to them in the form of agony. Yuji reached for the saint, but the man only smiled. "Run, Itadori. Carry the silence with you." The world imploded. Yuji fell once more into light and shadow, through screams that weren't his own, through memories that weren't his to keep. The last thing he saw was the saint's throne burning like a candle in the dark. Then, blackness. When he opened his eyes again, he was kneeling in the ashes of a city. Ruined spires loomed above him, broken statues of the emperor gazing down with empty eyes. Around him, millions of skulls lay in neat rows, as if arranged by reverent hands. A voice whispered behind him, colder than the void itself. "The gods have begun to move, little fracture, and soon they will want to see which of them you bleed for."
Yuji didn't turn. He couldn't. He only whispered, "Then I'll bleed for no one." And the silence that followed was so deep it almost sounded like faith. Somewhere the warp smiled, and Terra shivered in its sleep. The city had no name. Its skyline was a graveyard of cathedrals. Its streets were rivers of ash, where once the tread of pilgrims had worn grooves into stone. The wind here did not carry sound, it carried memory. Every gust whispered fragments of prayer, fragments of despair. Yuji stood among the bones of that forgotten metropolis, staring at a horizon that did not end. The air was heavy with the scent of incense and corrosion. The light was neither dawn nor dusk, it was perpetual, suspended between becoming and dying. He walked. Every footstep echoed with the ghosts of those who had knelt before false gods. Statues of the emperor lined the causeway, eroded into facelessness. Someone, or something, had chiseled new marks into their stone. A second face layered atop the first. Mouths open in silent scream, eyes gouged, halos cracked. At the heart of the city stood a great amphitheater of marble and brass. Its architecture defied gravity. Columns spiraling toward the heavens, arches dripping molten gold, altars carved into the bones of titans. And there, seated upon 4 massive thrones arranged in a perfect circle, waited the gods he had seen in the warp. They were vast beyond comprehension, yet every detail was intimate, like the memory of pain. Korn's throne was a mountain of skulls slick with fresh blood, rivers of it cascading into the streets below. His armor gleamed crimson, etched with 1,000,000 names that cried out in agony. Slanesh reclined upon a seat of mirrors that reflected infinity, their form constantly changing, man, woman, angel, serpent, all perfect, all unbearable. Tzeentch sat upon a spire of glass and fire, 1,000 books orbiting his shape, each page turning itself, each line rewriting reality. And Nurgle, vast and grotesquely gentle, rested upon a mound of decay blooming with impossible flowers. His smile was the patience of rot, his eyes the color of dying sunlight. They were not illusion, they were presence made flesh. The warp had condensed itself into thrones, and the thrones had shaped themselves to his nightmare. Yuji approached the center of their circle, the mark on his chest burning like a brand. He did not bow. He could not.
The gods regarded him as one might regard a flame, amused, curious, hungry. Korn spoke first, his voice like colliding worlds. You wear a mortal's face, but bleed the power of divinity. Tell me, little fighter, how many did you kill to earn your faith? Yuji's jaw tightened. I never fought for faith. Lies, Korn snarled. Every battle is faith. Every death is worship. You fight because you believe violence can change the world. That belief is my altar. Slaanesh laughed, their tone silk over blades. He fights because he fears emptiness. Look at him, so earnest, so starved for meaning. If he were to rest, his heart would devour itself. Yuji turned toward them, his voice low. I don't know what I've lost. Every life I've taken haunts me. Tzeentch's feathers rustled, their countless eyes blinking in rhythm. And yet you cling to the illusion of guilt. How enduring! You crave control in a universe that mocks the very concept. A book drifted toward him, opening to reveal pages filled with his memories, his friends, his battles, his promise to save others. I could rewrite this pain, the god whispered, replace regret with revelation. Yuji stared at the book, trembling. For an instant, he saw himself in another life, peaceful, unscarred, whole. Then he tore his gaze away. No, the pain is mine. Nurgle's laughter rolled like thunder, wrapped in warmth. Ah, child, you cling so tightly to suffering, yet refuse to love it. Let it soften you. Let decay teach you peace. Every wound you bear could bloom into grace if you would only stop fighting the inevitable. Their words coiled around him, seductive and suffocating. He could feel the truth in them, like poison disguised as mercy. Why me? He asked, his voice cracked, not from weakness, but from weariness older than his years. I'm no saint. I'm not even one of you. Slaanesh leaned forward, their forms splitting into dozens of faces, each whispering the same answer. Because you carry what we have lost. Yuji blinked. And what's that? Choice. The words struck him like lightning. Tzeentch's pages flared with light, Korn's chains rattled. Even Nurgle's blossoms withered for a moment. Choice, Tzeentch murmured, a soul untethered by dogma. You neither worship nor deny. You stand between light and shadow, refusing to kneel. That defiance, it terrifies us.
Yuji's breath trembled. Then why not destroy me? Because we envy you, Slaanesh purred. You still hope. The word hung in the air like blasphemy. For a long moment, none of the gods spoke. The wind howled through the ruined city, carrying the sound of a heartbeat that was not Yuji's. Then Korn rose, his armor dripping blood that sizzled as it touched the marble. Enough words. Let us see what hope can endure. He extended his hand, and a sword appeared in Yuji's grasp, its blade black as night, its hilt engraved with names he could not read. Slaanesh smiled, conjuring a mirror that shimmered beside him. If he survives Korn, he may face himself next. Tzeentch spread his wings, scattering pages that burned into the air. And if he fails, his soul will become ink for my book. Nurgle sighed, tender and ancient. Either way, he will return to us. All beauty rots in time. Yuji raised the blade.
its weight singing through his veins. He met Khorne's gaze, and for the first time saw not hate, but understanding. "I'm not here to win. I'm here to remember why I fight." Khorne grinned, teeth like forged suns. "Then bleed, mortal." And the trial began. The first strike fell like a prayer made of steel. The blow split the air in half. Sparks rained from the sky like burning rain as Yuji barely parried Khorne's blade. Each impact shook the ground, each clash a hymn to violence. The blood god's laughter echoed through the ruins, thunderous and pure. "Do you feel it, mortal?" Khorne roared. "This is truth, not faith, not mercy, only the purity of combat." Yuji's arms trembled beneath the weight of every strike. Each blow carried centuries of slaughter, the collective wrath of 1,000,000 dying worlds. His feet slid across the marble, his boots grinding through rivers of ash. The sword in his hand screamed as if it begged to be wielded by someone who deserved it more. But he did not falter. He could not. His thoughts scattered between blows, memories of battlefields, of people he'd sworn to protect. Megumi, Nobara, Gojo, faces flickering like ghosts. They had fought because they believed life was worth saving. He fought because he couldn't stop. Khorne lunged again, the strike too fast to see. Instinct took over. Yuji step-side and countered, his blade slicing through the air with impossible precision. Blood, bright, radiant, divine, splashed across the ground. For the first time, Khorne bled. The god froze. Then, slowly, he laughed, a laugh that shook the heavens. "Yes, you finally understand. This is worship. Every strike, every breath, you pray with your fists." "I'm not praying," Yuji shouted, his voice breaking. "I'm surviving." Their swords met once more, the impact creating a wave of pressure that shattered the marble beneath them. The energy tore through the amphitheater, scattering sparks of warp light into the storm above. And then, as suddenly as it began, Khorne stepped back. He rested his blade upon the ground, molten blood still dripping from his wound. "Enough," he said, the word vibrating through the ruins. "You are no coward and no god's puppet. You have earned your place at the threshold of faith." Yuji stood panting, his body shaking. "Then why do I still feel like I've lost?" "Because you haven't yet faced yourself," Khorne replied. He gestured toward Slaanesh, who rose gracefully from their mirror throne. "The next wound will come from within." Slaanesh's smile was soft, shimmering like silk in the gloom. "Lay down your weapon, child. You won't need it for what comes next." Yuji hesitated, then dropped the blade. The sound echoed endlessly. The god's hand extended toward him. "Step closer." He did. The mirror before them rippled, its surface glowing with a light that was both beautiful and unbearable. When Yuji looked into it, he saw himself, but not as he was. He saw a version untouched by suffering, a world where he had saved everyone, a world where he laughed freely, where his hands were clean. Gojo, alive. Nobara, alive. No curses, no blood, only peace. "Do you see?" Slaanesh whispered. "Perfection is not a lie. It is simply the truth, denied by fear. You could have this, all of it." Yuji reached out, trembling. His reflection smiled back, warm and human and whole. Then the mirror flickered. The reflection's smile twisted, the eyes darkened, and from its lips came a whisper. "You abandoned them." Yuji stepped back. "No, I tried." You failed. You let them die. You let me die. The glass pulsed. From within the reflection's skin seeped black veins, spreading like cracks through a painting. The face melted into Sukuna's grin, the king of curses reborn through memory. Was it worth it? The reflection mocked. Becoming their savior, only to damn yourself. Yuji fell to his knees. The mirror showed flashes of every moment he had tried to forget. Blood, screams, the faces of those he couldn't save. "Stop it!" he whispered. Slaanesh knelt beside him, their voice as soft as the breath of a lover. You could let it go. You could dissolve into bliss and never ache again. No guilt, no grief, just peace. Yuji's eyes filled with tears. For a heartbeat he wanted to believe, to stop fighting, to rest. But then he remembered the priest's words, the man who died protecting him. Even miracles must flee the blind. He rose slowly, his hands trembling but empty. No, he said, I don't want peace without pain. I don't want love without loss. Slaanesh's phase faded. Then you choose suffering? I choose truth. The mirror shattered. Light burst outward, cutting across the amphitheater in a storm of brilliance and shadow. Slaanesh's laughter dissolved into the wind. When the glare faded, Yuji stood alone once more, his heart heavy, his soul trembling. The other gods watched in silence.
Tzeentch's wings unfurled, feathers glimmering with cosmic flame. He has refused comfort and chaos both, the god murmured. Now let him see the pattern. With a flick of his hand, the air split open like parchment. Symbols, equations, memories, entire histories spiraled around Yuji, each one rewriting itself as he tried to read it. He saw the emperor upon his throne, burning for eternity. He saw worlds born and consumed in seconds. He saw himself, again and again, in infinite variations, dying, living, praying, killing. Tzeentch's voice echoed through his mind. Every act of mercy births a war. Every war breeds salvation. There is no end, only design. Yuji clutched his head, trying to make sense of it, but the knowledge was too vast. His thoughts dissolved into chaos. If everything's planned, then what's the point of choice? Tzeentch's laughter filled the air. The point, my little heretic, is that you keep asking. Then the visions collapsed into darkness. Yuji dropped to his knees again, gasping, his body trembling with exhaustion. Blood trickled from his nose, shimmering faintly with warp light. Nurgle's massive form stirred, the air filled with the scent of wet earth and decay. Poor child, he said, voice like thunder wrapped in sorrow. You have seen too much. He extended his hand, a barden blooming from rot, vines pulsing with life and death intertwined. Come, rest in my shade. Nothing hurts here, not even time. Yuji looked up, his face streaked with blood and ash. If I stop hurting, do I stop being human? Nurgle smiled sadly. You stop needing to be. For a long moment, Yuji said nothing. Then, with a trembling breath, he whispered, Then I'll keep hurting. The gods sighed, as though mourning something beautiful and inevitable. Then may your pain bear fruit, little one. And with that, the thrones dimmed. The gods' forms dissolved into mist, retreating into the warp's eternal horizon. Yuji fell forward, his vision fading.
His mark flared once, bright as a dying star. He had faced the gods and remained himself, but somewhere beyond the veil, something greater than gods had begun to awaken. The thrones crumbled, the world exhaled, and Yuji Itadori, alone and trembling, became the question that heaven could no longer ignore.
When the silence settled, it did not bring peace. It was the silence of aftermath, the breath held between collapse and remembrance. Yuji lay motionless at the center of the ruined amphitheater, the marble beneath him cracked and blackened by divine heat. His fingers twitched. Smoke drifted from the broken thrones, curling like dying prayers toward the dim heavens above. He opened his eyes, and for a moment he could see everything. The ruins, the bones, the faint echo of godhood fading into the warp. But beneath that, something else stirred. A vibration, low and deep, humming through the fabric of existence. It wasn't the voice of the chaos gods. It wasn't the emperor. It was older. He rose slowly, each movement a negotiation with pain. The mark upon his chest burned like a coal beneath his skin, pulsing with a rhythm that wasn't his own. As he breathed, the air shimmered, fragments of light, motes of impossible color floating upward like dust. The gods were gone, yet their essence lingered. His mind was fractured between their whispers and his own heartbeat. Rage, temptation, curiosity, decay. They had touched him deeply enough to leave a residue, a stain that glowed faintly in the void. He walked among the remains of their thrones, where corns had stood. The ground was soaked in crimson glass. In it, Yuji could see reflections of every battle he'd ever fought, every person he'd ever failed. He kneeled beside it, dipping his fingers into the solidified blood. It was warm. You wanted me to believe violence was faith, but maybe faith is what keeps me from becoming you. The glass cracked under his touch. He turned toward the shattered mirror of Slanesh, now nothing but shards that shimmered with stolen beauty. In each fragment, a face, his own, smiled back at him differently, proud, cruel, merciful, lost. He gathered one piece carefully and held it to the faint light. The reflection whispered, "You'll never be whole." Yuji's lips curved in a weary half-smile. Then, "I'll fight as I am." He let the shard fall, and it vanished before it struck the ground. Tzeentch's throne was gone entirely, consumed by its own contradictions. In its place, a spiral burned into the marble floor, lines of energy still moving like living veins. When Yuji stepped near, he saw visions in the pattern, worlds unmade and remade, choices branching endlessly like roots of a cosmic tree. He reached out, and for an instant he touched the thread that was his own life. He saw himself from above, a fragile figure stumbling through eternity, defying systems older than time. And then the vision shattered. Only one throne remained intact, Nurgle's. It pulsed faintly, alive, its surface a garden of decay where small luminous insects crawled between blooming fungi. Yuji approached it slowly. The air smelled like rain after long drought, death giving birth to new life. He touched one of the blossoms. It crumbled in his hand, leaving behind a single seed that glowed softly before fading into his palm. "Maybe you were right," he whispered. Maybe pain is the soil that hope grows from. He stood then, the amphitheater empty, the gods gone, but their truths carved into his bones. Around him, the city began to dissolve, the marble turning to dust, the towers crumbling like sand sculptures under an unseen tide. The world was ending, or perhaps it was being remade. As the light grew, a familiar voice drifted through the air, not divine, not monstrous, but achingly human. Yuji Itadori. He turned. Varela stood before him, though her armor was shattered, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. You disappeared. The sky burned and the world cracked open, and we thought you were gone. He blinked, disbelief flickering across his face. You're alive? She nodded slowly. If this is life. The storm never stopped. The warp swallowed the front. Everything changed, and now somehow we're here. He looked around. The ruins, the empty sky, the slow unraveling of reality. This place isn't real anymore. Neither are we, she said softly. They stood in silence for a long moment. Around them, time began to lose meaning. The city folded inward, turning itself into light. Varela stepped closer, placing a hand over his chest where the mark still glowed. She whispered, "You've seen them, haven't you? The ones who made this universe scream?" Yuji nodded. "They wanted me to kneel, to choose." "And did you?" He met her gaze. "No, I think I disappointed them." A faint smile touched her lips. "Then maybe you gave them something new to fear." The ground shook. The last fragments of the thrones lifted into the air, drawn upward into a whirlpool of radiance above. The sky tore open, revealing not stars but eyes, millions of them, watching, blinking, dreaming. Varela gripped his hand tightly. "What now?" Yuji looked toward the light, the mark on his chest burning brighter, his reflection in her eyes flickering between human and something more. "I think," he said quietly, "they're calling me to finish it." The storm roared in response, swallowing their words. The wind became a choir of voices, both divine and damned. The eyes above widened, as if recognizing what he had become. A question, unresolved and dangerous. The light engulfed them both. For an instant, Yuji saw every possibility. The Emperor's throne cracking, Terra burning, the Chaos gods weeping and laughing in equal measure. He saw humanity kneeling before machines of its own making, and yet still whispering prayers to a god who never answered. And beneath it all, he saw himself, one fragile, furious soul standing in defiance of eternity. Then the world ended again. He was falling, but this time he wasn't afraid, because this time he understood. The gods demand worship. The Emperor demands obedience, but the universe itself? It only asks that you keep walking. Yuji closed his eyes, the light consuming him. And somewhere in the warp, something smiled, not with malice, but with recognition.
The light faded slowly, like a dying breath. When Yuji opened his eyes, he was standing on a plane of glass that stretched endlessly beneath a blood-red sky. The horizon shimmered with the faint outline of colossal figures, statues of saints, titans, and forgotten gods, each one fractured, half buried in the transparent earth. Beneath the glass flowed a sea of light, swirling and alive, as if souls themselves moved beneath his feet. He was back in the warp. But this time, it was different. The air did not scream. The storm had gone quiet. The warp, for the first time, was listening. A figure awaited him in the distance, motionless and radiant, shrouded in gold. The light surrounding it did not flicker or burn. It endured. Yuji walked toward it, each step sending ripples through the glass beneath him. With each ripple, fragments of voices rose from below, echoes of prayers, confessions, and dying words. They merged into one vast broken hymn. Emperor, deliver us. Emperor, forgive us. Emperor, remember us. As he approached, the figure came into focus. It was the Emperor, or what remained of him. Not the corpse king of Terra, bound to his throne in endless agony, but something deeper, older. The idea of him, the dream of humanity made manifest. His armor was cracked, his crown dim, his face a hollow sun. Yet behind those hollow eyes burned a light that refused to die. Yuji stopped several paces away. "You called me," he said softly. The Emperor's voice filled the air, not through sound, but through memory. Every word was an emotion: sorrow, weariness, patience older than stars. I did not call. I remembered. Yuji frowned. Remembered what? What it was to be human. The words hit him like thunder, muffled by grief. You're saying, you forgot?
The Emperor looked past him, toward the shattered horizon. When you bear the souls of 1,000,000,000,000 children, the weight ceases to be love. It becomes gravity. I have not spoken because every word I say could destroy a world. I have not moved because every breath I take could birth another god. Yuji stepped closer. Then why am I here? The Emperor's gaze turned to him. For an instant, Yuji saw himself reflected in that dying light. Small, mortal, imperfect. Yet that reflection stood unbroken. Because you still fight without faith, the Emperor said. You act not because you believe you will win, but because you cannot stand still. That is humanity's last miracle. Yuji's throat tightened. The gods said I carried something they'd lost, choice. But if everything ends in suffering, what's the point of choice? Suffering is not the absence of meaning. It is the cost of creation. Even I was born of it. He raised a hand, and the glass plane beneath them changed. The sea of light shifted into images of Terra's golden age, the birth of the legions, the burning of Prospero, the siege, the silence that followed. History bled across the ground like veins of fire. Once, the Emperor said, I thought I could save them by removing choice. I thought if I could build a perfect order, humanity would no longer need gods. But I became one instead. I caged myself upon a throne of my own design. Yuji felt the words settle deep within him, like embers finding kindling. Then you're saying the gods exist because of us? The Emperor nodded faintly. They are the mirror of mankind's soul. Every prayer, every fear, every dream given shape. The warp is not hell. It is the inside of you, unguarded. Yuji clenched his fists. Then why don't you destroy them?
The emperor's gaze hardened. "Because to destroy them, I would have to destroy you, all of you." The silence that followed was unbearable. The wind whispered through the fractures in the glass. Beneath their feet, the light stirred like restless souls. Yuji looked down. "So that's it? You sit in silence and we suffer for eternity?" For the first time, the emperor smiled, a faint thing, broken. "You misunderstand, child. My silence was never abandonment. It was surrender. I stopped speaking so that humanity could learn to listen to itself." Yuji stepped closer, his voice rising. "Then what if we fail?"
"Then the universe will begin again. Perhaps in the next we'll learn." Yuji's anger flared. "That's not enough. People are dying, burning, begging for you to do something." The emperor's eyes glowed brighter. "Then why are you here, Itadori Yuji?" The question struck him like a blade. He opened his mouth, but no answer came. "You wished to save everyone," the emperor continued, his voice like the pulse of a dying star. "And now you stand before what no one can save. Tell me, do you still wish to bear that curse?" Yuji's heart pounded, his hands shook. He wanted to say no. He wanted to rest. But he saw the faces again, his friends, his enemies, the soldiers who died nameless on 1,000 worlds. He whispered, "Yes." The emperor's expression softened, almost sorrowful. "Then I grant you what I cannot give myself." The air rippled, the glass beneath them cracked, the sea of light roared upward, flooding the sky. It poured into Yuji's chest, through the burning mark, filling him with the weight of uncountable souls. He screamed, not from pain, but from understanding too vast for a mortal frame. The emperor's voice thundered one last time. "You will walk among them, not as savior, not as God, but as memory. A reminder that the divine is not above the human, but born from it." Yuji fell to his knees, his body radiating light. What happens to you?" "I fade," the emperor said simply. "My silence has been broken." The golden figure began to unravel, dissolving into dust that shone like dawn. The warp trembled, the sea of souls rising in song. Yuji reached out desperate. "Wait, what am I supposed to do?" The emperor's voice came faintly now, as if from behind a closing door.
"Do what gods cannot. Remember." The world shattered. Yuji fell once more, down through light, through shadow, through memory itself. He did not scream this time. He simply closed his eyes, carrying the silence of a god and the heartbeat of a man. And somewhere beyond the veil, a new hymn began, soft, uncertain, but human. He landed upon a world of ash and dawnlight. The air was thin, sharp as prayer. In the distance rose the burned ruins of a manufactorium, its spires broken, its banners long turned to dust. What sky remained flickered between twilight and storm, as though reality itself was undecided whether to continue or to end. Yuji knelt among the ruins.
His armor was gone, replaced by robes of tattered gray. The mark on his chest no longer burned. Instead, it pulsed softly, like a heartbeat trying to remember its rhythm. He could hear them now, the living, the countless voices of men and women echoing faintly across the world, farmers praying to machines, soldiers whispering to their guns, mothers reciting the imperial creed to children who had never seen the stars. Every word, every breath, a plea cast into a silent universe. And beneath all of it, the warp stirred like a sleeping animal. The gods had not vanished. They waited. Yuji walked through the shattered city. Each step echoed against the bones of its faith. He passed a broken chapel, its door hanging open, incense ash thick upon the floor. Inside, a servitor still moved, blind, ancient, endlessly repeating a ritual of maintenance it no longer understood. Its vox grill whispered, "The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects." Yuji stopped before it. "He's gone," he said quietly. The servitor didn't answer. Its metal fingers traced a glowing symbol on the floor, the two-headed aquila, half faded, half consuming itself. Yuji sank to his knees beside it. But maybe that's not the end. Maybe he became us. The servitor paused, its hands still in motion. Then, for the first time in 10,000 years, it stopped chanting. The silence that followed was not empty. It was reverent.
Outside, thunder rolled across the wasteland. He stood again and walked toward the horizon. In the far distance, a light flickered, a beacon that pulsed in rhythm with the mark upon his chest. It called to him, though not with words. He followed it through the storm. As he walked, visions came unbidden, memories that were not his own. He saw custodians kneeling before a burning palace. He saw the astronomicon flicker and die. He saw pilgrims still marching across dead stars, whispering prayers to a throne that no longer answered. And then he saw something new. A woman. Her robes were torn, her hands scarred, her eyes reflecting a quiet defiance. She knelt beside a dying child, whispering the imperial creed. But her words were different. Not, "The Imperial protects," but, "We protect one another." The child smiled, weak but alive. The light above them shifted, faint but real. Yuji stopped walking. His heart trembled. It had begun. He climbed a hill of shattered aquillas and bones until the beacon came into view. It was not a tower, nor a machine. It was a gathering of people, ragged, desperate, human. They were building a fire, their faces illuminated by the first true flame Terra had seen in millennia. At their center stood Virella. She turned as he approached, her expression unreadable. "You made it," she said softly. Yuji nodded. "I think I'm starting to understand why." The wind tugged at her cloak, scattering ash around them. The warp is changing. The storms have slowed. The voices are quieter. And the light. She looked up at the fire. The light feels alive again. Yuji gazed into the flame. Within it, he could see reflections of faces, millions of them, not gods or saints, but ordinary souls. Farmers, warriors, children. They were the Emperor's last prayer, still burning even after he was gone.
"Faith didn't die," Yuji murmured. "It evolved." Virella studied him. "Then what are you now, Yuji Itadori? A prophet? A daemon?
A saint?
He shook his head. None of those. Just a man who remembers. She laughed softly, though her eyes were wet.
You sound like him.
Yuji smiled faintly. No, he sounded like us. The wind carried his words upward, and for a heartbeat the clouds parted. Through the veil of the storm the stars shone faintly, dim but not gone. The people around the fire turned their faces toward the light, whispering prayers not out of fear, but out of gratitude. Yuji closed his eyes. He could feel it now. The warp pulsing with change. The chaos gods still lived, but their forms trembled. They felt it too, the first tremor of something they could not devour. Hope, the oldest enemy of all. Virella stepped closer, lowering her voice. They'll come for you again, won't they? Yes. But not yet. They're watching, waiting. They want to see what happens when humanity remembers it never needed permission to be divine. The fire crackled. The people sang softly in the dark, their voices weaving into something older than scripture, older than fear.
A hymn without a god. Yuji looked once more to the stars. The mark upon his chest pulsed one final time, then faded. Maybe this is what he meant, he whispered. The silence wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. Virella tilted her head. To who? To everyone who keeps walking. He turned from the fire, his figure outlined against the dawn. The sky began to brighten, not with holy light, but with the quiet promise of renewal. The world was still broken, still haunted, but it was breathing again. And somewhere, beyond the veil of reality, the Emperor's voice, soft, almost human, whispered once more. Well done. Yuji did not stop walking. The wind carried the last embers of the hymn through the stars. The gods listened, uneasy for the first time in eons, because what they heard was not worship. It was humanity remembering itself. And in that memory, even gods could bleed. The light rose, the world turned, and in the endless silence between heartbeats, a new age began.